This episode of In Focus is being made possible through the support of the Wayne County government.
Last year, I completed a marathon. When I had COVID this year, I couldn't even play the acoustic guitar. And that really concerned me, and that really made it hit home for me. If somebody like myself, who I would say was generally healthy, can get knocked down that far by COVID-19, the people who could have severe symptoms, I couldn't imagine how that could impact their body.
Good evening. Happy New Year. And thanks for joining me for part two of our look back on conversations that we had during this past year on In Focus. This evening's show will bring you more of the conversations. I got asked by someone who ran into me, why didn't I do shorter clips? Why didn't I try to get everything in? That would have been a little bit difficult. Those shows that we are able to bring you, we wanted to bring you a few minutes of each one of the conversations that we were able to have. But obviously there were a number of people who gave us time this year who we greatly appreciated, who did not make this, it's not even a best of, it's just a look back at some of the conversations. Coming up in this show, Chris Hardy, we'll hear from him. He sat in for me for a few weeks, and we greatly appreciate him. And Chris is one of the people that we hope to bring back into the In Focus chair in 2021. So thanks for watching this look back at In Focus. We are in the emergency management area. We're speaking with Matthew Kane, who is director of the emergency management and communications. I'm close enough?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And Deputy Director of Emergency Management, John Duke. Thanks for taking some time. I know you all are incredibly busy right now.
Thank you.
Let's start with spring has sprung, and we felt it this past weekend when we ended up with a high wind warning, a high wind advisory, a thunderstorm warning, and something
flash
else.
Flood, I believe.
Yeah, flash flood that all
yeah.
kind of blew in. This time of year, normally you all are talking a lot about the weather, but the conversation has shifted. But let's start with that. What do people really need to kind of be aware of this time of year?
Sure, absolutely. 2 weeks ago was actually Indiana's Severe Weather Awareness Week. We pushed some things out on our social media, but for obvious reasons, it was a bit overshadowed, and we understand that. However, this weekend was a perfect example that we can't necessarily ignore severe weather. While it can happen year-round, it is traditionally seen kind of in the springtime.
Correct. And we like to get out and talk, like you said, and unfortunately, due to current situations, we didn't get quite the opportunity we normally do.
Talk a little bit about what you want people to be aware of now, just as weather continues to change. And also, I mean, we saw it in Arkansas where a tornado came through. We're talking about social distancing, but people's inclinations immediately in something like that are to go and help their neighbors. How do you all put those two things together? And what are you telling people when they reach out?
Right. Well, it's a delicate balance that not very many people have had to deal with when it comes to making sure that we're keeping our social distancing, but at the same time, when you have something like that affect a community, you're right, everybody wants to come together and help out. We just have to consciously think of ways that we can try to limit our exposure in any way possible. Specific guidelines, I don't know that we have anything prepared for or any plans for that. It's which disaster takes precedence at that moment. And very fluid, always changing. So,
I think one of the things that people want to know is our government, is their government working together and communicating during this pandemic? Talk about where you all fall in the chain. Who's kind of leading you? How are your messages going out? And how closely do those messages mirror what they're hearing from other people?
What we are doing is we get our guidance from the Indiana Department of Health Services, Indiana State Health Department, and the health department takes the lead in this current situation, and then we try and mirror our information from those sources. That way we're all putting out a consistent message.
We have plans in place. Wayne County has had a pandemic flu plan or pandemic illness plan in place. It's one of the first things we did when we first started seeing it coming this way or affecting our areas. We broke open that plan, making sure that we as emergency management are doing everything that the plan says that we need to do. It's been written and revised multiple times through the years. A lot of it's based off the historical data obtained from the 1918 Spanish flu. And so we made sure that we went through, there's literally checklists for every entity within the county. These are the things the health department needs to be thinking about. These are the things emergency management thinks about. Law enforcement, fire, EMS, healthcare. It literally spans the whole gamut. And so that's one thing we did. We worked very closely with the health department to develop what we are referring to as our pandemic task force. We have integral individuals on that. I'll let you kind of explain who's on that maybe even.
What we have is the key players all involved. We have representatives from Reed Health, the health department, Richmond Fire, county fire departments. EMS is represented through a person as well. We have basically
The
elected officials and extended care facilities or nursing homes also have a representative on there. And we get together as often as we need to by conference call. That way we are, doing everything that we say to do. So we're not coming together and meeting, but we are communicating regularly.
Without divulging things that you can't tell ahead of time, what are those conversations like? What type of things are you all going over? Because I've been hearing about these conversations that are being held, and they're being held a couple of times a week, 3-4 times a week, every other day, something along those lines.
Absolutely.
Lasting
Yes.
about how long and covering what type of topics?
The duration depends on exactly what information we, as collectively as a group, need to share. So the time isn't really a set time, but we do get together, and it's what I would call a situational brief. That way, all the key players are up to speed and have the most current, credible, and factual information.
It may be sharing numbers from Reed Hospital. It may be sharing what the health department plans to do with some of their orders that Dr. Jetmore has put out. It may be sharing things that we have heard from the responder side. That's kind of the role of emergency management anyway. We're a liaison from our first responders in the field to our elected officials, and that's one of our roles, is making sure we have that communication channel open and flowing at all times, even during a pandemic. So if we're hearing concerns that we're getting from our first responders that need to be taken to the health department or to our elected officials, that's one of our jobs. And so those types of things are shared. Ideas for messaging. The city was gracious enough to allow their media specialist to assist those of us that don't have a media specialist. We're trying to wear all hats all at the same time. And so we're coming together to share information, share what we want to get out to the public on social media and other venues to make sure that we're all sharing the same message. And that is our ultimate goal throughout all of this, is just to decrease the amount of citizens that are affected by it.
Welcome back to In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We have a chance to hang out in the place. I've sat back here and listened to some music on multiple occasions. We're in the beer garden at Smiley's Pub. We can't be inside. That's different. To tell people that they can't be inside your business, that's got to be odd.
Yes, it is. It's very odd.
We're speaking with Kathy Hillard, who is owner, along with her husband Terry, of, you all have multiple business, some that are open, some that are not. Tell us what your businesses are.
We own Smiley's Pub, Birdie's Music Bar, Top of the Head Barber Shop, and I also have a nail salon, and the barber shop and nail salon are closed.
Okay. Birdie's, tell us a little bit about that particular business.
Birdie's, we've owned it for 11 years, and we started serving food about 5 years ago, and it has really taken off. We deliver, we have a lot of carry out, and Smiley's we've had about 2 years. So Birdie's has really taken off with the food. It took off first.
Okay. As you said, you've had to close 2 businesses. You've got 2 that are still open, but you've had to make some adjustments because of the time that we're in, as it were. Talk a little bit about some of the adjustments that you've had to make in each one of your businesses and the acceptance that you're getting in the community.
The changes definitely are the amount of food that we are selling right now. We had 4 food trucks, huge food trucks delivered last week, and we still had to go to our supplier twice to replenish because our storage and our freezers and our coolers are just packed, but we go through it so fast. It's important, I feel like we deliver to Reed Hospital, multiple locations. We deliver to a lot of people that are shut in, and can't get out or, don't have transportation. We're relying on public transportation, and so they can't get out to get food, or they're of an age that they don't feel comfortable getting out with all of this going on, so they have food delivered. And for us, it's really important that we can get to these people.
Talk a little bit about the decision that you all made, because you all are like a number of small businesses in the area, particularly in the restaurant business. You could do the carry out to the car, or you could close. Some have tried to carry out for a while, but they finally decided to close. You decided to hang on. What went into making those decisions for you?
I think the biggest factor was the people that were counting on us to stay open to bring them food. They couldn't get out from their office or their doctor's office that need food, that need to eat to keep going. And they're obviously, right now, they're exhausted. They're tired, and they need all the help they can to get the nourishment that they can to keep going. That's probably the biggest one. Birdie's, we have a lot of people that live in that neighborhood that walk, that can get a hold of us and stand outside our front door to get food, that they don't have the accessibility to get out to the store either. So I think that was probably the biggest factor on staying open.
As business people, how are you all doing? Because
exhausted.
It has to be both physically and mentally tiring.
It's very exhausting staying with every day. It seemed like the first week something was changing, and a new guideline rule was changing. Our marketing has totally changed, and just keeping the supplies in stock. That's been a huge issue for us. When, like I said, we have 100, 150 case orders every day coming in, and we still are running out. So that's probably been the most challenging part of it.
So the response to you all being able to continue to sell food has at least been positive from a business standpoint?
Yes, it has been very positive. All of our customers have been positive. They're very gracious that we are able to come out and bring them food.
You said your marketing has changed a little bit. Talk a little bit about what changes you've had to make. And obviously you're doing it on the fly, but what are you seeing works well? What are you seeing that didn't work well that you stopped? What kind of changes have you made?
Well, our marketing, we do a lot of factory catering. And I had to totally change that to box lunch catering. And so I've sent out emails to all of our factories that we have catered for, and put together box lunches, which is something we hadn't really done before because that's not what we were doing with them. The other issue or problem marketing wise, I had to come up with some different menu items to kind of keep, because there's not a lot of places open now, to keep, some changes going on. So that's been another, this week we're starting some different dinners that are not normally on our menu at both places.
How are you letting people know that you're making those changes?
Social media is what has worked best for us.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the staff that you've been able to keep on. Have you had to let people go? What that has been like for you all?
That's been really hard. We are a very, very close work community, I would say. That's been really hard to do that to your employees.
I kind of get the feeling that the restaurant business, or people in the restaurant business as a whole, kind of see themselves almost as a family. Is that a
Yes.
true statement?
Yes.
What's it been like having to watch some other people in that family make the decision to close completely and lay people off, as opposed to what you all have been able to do?
I feel for them because it's tough. It is tough. It's a tough decision to make. And I feel like it's a day-to-day, hour-to-hour sometimes, whether, or not. In the beginning especially, we were going to be able to stay open, or we were, going to have to lay everybody off, or, and how business was going to be. That was another thing, I didn't know 2 weeks ago on a Monday whether we were going to have an order or not. I didn't know. Thankfully we have, but I still feel like it's a day-to-day thing.
I'm having a chance to talk flowers, roses in particular, with Beth Vanderbert, who is the president of the Richmond Rose Garden. Beth, thanks for being back with us again.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
This is another one of those things that, as we talk about the pandemic, is a sad story, kind of, because we will lose this year's bloom and glow. But one of the good parts is the Rose Garden still exists and people can walk at any time, right?
That's correct. Yes, we planted new roses and the roses will bloom, and we would love to have as many visitors as possible.
Talk a little bit about, for those who don't know, real quickly, kind of the history of the Rose Garden, where it is, why it is, and what people will see when they go through.
Well, the Richmond Rose Garden, as I refer to it, is actually called the All-American Rose Garden, and it was dedicated in the summer of 1987, right alongside the E.G. Hill Garden, which was celebrating its 50th anniversary. And it was dedicated to keep the legacy of E.G. Hill going in the community. So it kind of was a logical place for the committee that got together for the Rose Garden to put it there. And so we're right in front of Glen Miller Park, right along US 440. I've heard the term, for us, we're the front door to the park. Yeah, kind of. And so we've been there for 30, 40 years, all volunteer. The park, they help us as much as they can, but obviously they have a lot of properties to take care of. So our volunteers maintain the roses ourselves entirely. We don't, they do just a few things for us.
When you say maintain, you all take care of, plant, replant, mulch, the whole 9 yards.
You are correct. We just planted 102 roses last week. So yes, we have volunteers who help plant and weed and deadhead and water when we plant new things, and just do anything that we need to do to make the roses look nice, mulch. It goes on all year from about April to November, and then when we're not actually working, we're planting. Things like Bloom and Glow. And first Bloom and Glow came to be to celebrate the first blooms in the Rose Garden. And actually, we used to kind of celebrate it, but it was really small. And then someone gave us the idea, hey, why don't you make it a big event? And over the we've done it for 7 years, and this will be the first year to not do it. It's grown into a really large, very cool event, and we are super proud of what that's become.
You just mentioned you planted 102 roses last week. Is that like a normal planting year? Is that a little large? That seems like a large number to me.
It's been our normal for about the last 3 years for various reasons. Some of the roses haven't winterized as well as they had in the past. Some of our winters have been kind of strange lately with you get these warm days for a while and the roses will leaf out and then you get a really hard freeze and it could kill a whole plant if it's not established yet. So for us, it's been normal to plant 100 roses. And then there are new areas where we're adding. We took out some bushes. We wanted to fill in some areas, and so it's kind of our normal.
If people haven't been there and they start to walk through, you all have been doing some updating. You just talked about taking out some bushes and doing some things. You all were doing a capital campaign to really kind of make the walking a little bit easier in that area. Talk about how that's gone, and are we going to see some changes in the near future?
Yes, we were pretty excited about that. Our walkways are actually pretty noteworthy. They are made out of star bricks. They were donated. Mayor Walterman, they had stockpiled them in the city and didn't know what to do with them, donated them to the Rose Garden. So the bricks have been there for over 30 years, just laying on a bed of sand. And in the Midwest, when it gets hot and cold in the winter and we get these freezing and thawing, those are starting to pop up, and it's starting to become harder for our volunteers and our visitors to walk. And we really want people to be able to stroll through our garden. So we have been working really hard for the last 5 years to put together a project, and we are going to refurbish and revitalize those walkways. So this fall, you will see a lot of work being done at the Rose Garden, where we are going to pull up those star bricks. They will be saved because they will be put back down. And the bed below them is going to be like an aggregate, make it much sturdier. There'll be edging. And then the bricks will be put back because every person we've met with has talked to us about how cool those bricks are.
Everything that we've been through really emphasizes the importance of local media. I just hope people will see that there is an importance in supporting local media.
Welcome to this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director of Whitewater Community Television. Glad you're able to join us for, hey, this isn't a Zoom conversation. We're actually somewhat face-to-face, still social distancing, but we're not in the studio and I'm not on my webcam, and that's always a good feeling. So things are beginning to get back to normal. A little bit of echo in a place. You kind of get that when you go into a gym. I haven't spent a ton of time in a gym, but it's got that sound to it. Yeah. We are at Townsend Community Center. I am with Derek White, who is, let me try this, the Executive Director for the Housing Authority of the City of Richmond.
Yes.
Yes. We had Derek on the show back in December. Spent the hour having a chance to talk, kind of catch up, get to know each other a little bit. And one of the things that we talked about was Townsend Community Center.
Yes.
Because it is a place that has been on the minds of the community for a long time. This is a place that a lot of people, even you, say they grew up in. Absolutely. It was next to home, the place where more time was spent. Roof issues, heating issues, other things have kind of emptied this place out.
Yes.
We're standing in the gym. The floor is beautiful.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Talk a little bit about what's been able to get done so far.
We're really excited about the work that's taken place so far. And to go back a little bit, the funding that we acquired to actually do the work came from our old turnkey 3 homes, 73 homes that are mostly in the Irish Hills Court area, Riley Hills Court, and then several on South 10th, 11th, and 12th, etc. And those proceeds were in an account. They were drawing interest, and so we were able to pull from that money to actually begin the work here at Townsend. So we put a roof on, We painted the gym.
That was no small feat. That could not have been a small feat.
Not at all.
You say, we put a roof on, and you just kind of throw that away. This roof is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Painted with 3 coats of paint. The flooring is done and done well. And these memories for me just really, you know, I told Eric earlier, I told you earlier, brought my ball in to break in the goals here. Just took 1 shot each, and that was about it. And then, of course, the gym is named after James M. Townsend, who Townsend Center gets its name from in the first place. And then we put in a new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. And as you see along the top, the tubes there, they'll blow out heating and air. It balances that in the entire gym area, which is really nice. And so we're really excited. We've got a lot more work to go. The downstairs still has to be done, and then we're going to be doing ceiling tiles, floor coverings, and painting in all of the other area, the game room area, the hallway, the classrooms and offices. So we still have more work to do, but we're really excited where we've come so far.
Let's talk a little bit about a couple of different things.
Sure.
The heating and air. Normally, you've walked into some places, and when the heating and air kicks on, you know it.
Yes.
What's the sound in here going to be like? Because this is also a place that has housed events.
Yes.
So you know, you have a speaker. Yeah, they have a microphone, but the heating and air kicks on, and they're shouting over. Are you going to run into that?
It'll be a nice smooth flow, like a gentle breeze.
Nice.
And it's kind of the latest state of the art. We've actually added a unit and a tire system outside, and also a boiler downstairs as well. And then we got a backup boiler for the old one. So we're in pretty good shape as it relates to the air quality here. So. Yeah.
You said that you were doing some research on James Townsend. For those who may not know, pass along a little bit of what you found out.
Well, he was African American, and he enrolled or enlisted in the Civil War in 1863. He fought till 1865, and then when the war was over, he was the catalyst behind desegregating Richmond schools. In 1881, his daughter wanted to take a German class, and because she wasn't in the right ward, so to speak, they denied her that opportunity. So he went on the trail to actually desegregate the schools to give her that opportunity to learn German. And he's 60 years ahead of the state of Indiana. The state of Indiana didn't desegregate until 1949. And so we're 60 years ahead in that area. He also was appointed by President Benjamin Harrison for, I think it was General Land Use for the United States. And then also he pastored several churches in Evansville, in Terre Haute, in Indianapolis, here in Richmond at Bethel AME, and then also in Chicago. And he left here from Bethel, he was here from 1872 to 1876, and 1874, went to Chicago, and then comes back here in Richmond. And my old saying is, that park water must have got him back to town. That seemed like it works on everybody. And but he died here. He lived in the 500 block of South 9th. He died in his home. They had a funeral in his home, and then he's buried now at the Earlham Cemetery. And his wife is buried with him as well. She died in 1923, but he left proceeds, if you will, to actually help start Townsend. And so that's where Townsend Community Center gets its namesake, is from him.
The name is on the floor, and you're saying, now I'm looking at this floor, and I think it's beautiful. You're saying you all didn't pull up the floor and put down a new floor. No. You just reconditioned the floor that was here.
Yes, and this floor is 56 years old.
Wow.
1964, this one. And it's just absolutely beautiful. There's a couple of areas where we had some damage that we've taken care of, but it just looks absolutely beautiful. I can't wait to hear the squeaking of the shoes.
The shoes?
The games, yeah.
Talk about where Townsend Center goes from here. I know you talked about needing to do some renovation all throughout the building, new doors, security, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. What's your timetable? Are you trying to find, I know you know there are agreements that have to be worked out, so you probably can't necessarily talk about some of the tenants, but are you talking about tenants, and what's the timetable for this building being part of the life and the restoration of the North End again?
We're shooting for completion of the upstairs to be done hopefully by the fall. The other part downstairs may be a little longer because the potential tenant there has been affected by the COVID issue, and they've been kind of backed up several months from some work that they need to do there. So hopefully by the fall, at least the upstairs area will be completed, and the parking lot on the outside and the sidewalks on the south and west end of the property will be brand new as well. And then outside, you see a cement pad there. That's going to be for like a gazebo area, like a little picnic area for socialization and so forth. So, and that's going to be done probably the next couple of months or so. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So as we get into the fall months, we'll be seeing a little bit more life rolling around here. I assume that some of the thought process is there are a lot of kids who grew up in Townsend. I've heard about Townsend kids. Obviously, I was never one. I assume part of the thought process is whoever comes back in here kind of recreates that feeling that the youth of Richmond have a place to come, and it may be 2 or 3 different tenants all doing different things, but a lot of them will be dealing with youth.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. And that's key for us, and we're excited about that possibility because you hear so often about youth not having anything to do. Well, there'll be plenty to do with the tenants that we potentially will have in the building. So we're really excited about that.
Hi, and welcome to this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television, WGTV Channel 11. I'm Chris Hardy, and I'm sitting in for Eric Marsh as your host for a few episodes in the month ahead. As Eric and I talked about possible themes for these next few episodes, we felt that it is very important to continue the conversations in our community around the essential question of what it looks like for Black people in our city, in our state, and our nation to feel and to know true equality. We also know that we cannot fully explore that question without white people in our community joining in and attempting to understand our role in systems of racism, what privileges and biases contribute to that, and what actions we can take to be a part of the solution. I think that as white people, we need to show that we are listening, that we are understanding, and that we are willing to do some hard work on issues of racism in the name of justice for everybody. My first guest is someone who I think can help us have at least a part of that conversation. Betsy Schlabach is an associate professor of history and African American studies at Earlham College here in Richmond. And she is someone who's done a lot of research and learning and teaching around these topics. Betsy, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I wonder if you could briefly just tell us a little bit about your background and your areas of study and teaching.
Sure. So my research focuses on African American history, urban history, and race relations. Most recently, I've been working on the intersections of racism and public health, specifically how that relates to the pandemic of 1918, which has a lot of relevance for our current epidemic. And so I teach African American history, I teach urban history, and I've published a book on Black Chicago, and I hope to soon publish another looking at women's roles in Chicago's economy in the mid-20th century. So yeah, that's a little bit of what I do in the classroom and outside of it.
Great. Vocabulary can be so important in these discussions we're having. So before we dive into some questions, I want to make sure we take a minute to get on the same page about a couple of key terms. And I know that it can be really tempting to oversimplify racism as kind of overt, clear, bad acts that someone commits with the intention to hurt someone else because of their race. But I think that we're learning to kind of go beyond that definition of racism and think about systems of racism and systemic racism. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what systemic racism is and how it works.
So I think systemic racism refers to the ways in which, like you said, that racism, yes, can be these overt acts of violence committed against people of color. But racism is also about the systems and the pervasive nature of racism. So it's not just one incident of racial bias or racist actions, but it's how those intertwine and filter through the systems that we live in. So how racism might inform access to healthcare or voting rights, college admissions policies. So it's about the ways in which racism informs the structures and the systems that govern our lives that give white people more privilege than Black people.
And is there a way to quantify something like that? Like, can you say a given country or region is experiencing or has a certain level of systemic racism or another, or is that part of why it's hard to get at because it's hard to measure?
I think it is. It's part of the reasons why it's really hard to measure it. I also think that we should be skeptical of trying to quantify it, because once we quantify it, we think we can measure it.
Yeah.
And that's when, again, like even the systems that might measure it are informed by racism. And so it's really messy and tricky. And in terms of, which nations are more or less racist, I know the UN has done some summits on racism and global racism, and the United States hasn't had a good track record of participating in such things,
Okay.
Which should tell us something. But I think that quantifying it is difficult because those systems of quantification would also be informed by racism.
Yeah.
So it's very messy. And I think to help me understand it, I've most recently been reading Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Okay.
And in his book, just to go back to your question about definitions, he sets up in the introduction, he starts his book by offering definitions of racism and anti-racism. And he doesn't want us to rely on a binary of racist or not racist, because what he says, racism is supporting a person who's supporting or ignoring policies, racist policies through their actions or inactions. Okay, so he says, I'll say that again. So racist is one who supports a racist policy through their action or inaction. And he says anti-racist is one who supports an anti-racist policy through their actions or expresses an anti-racist idea. And so that's the binary that he wants us to adopt, and abandon this idea that something's not racist, because we live in a racist system. So everything is informed by that condition of being within a racist system. And then going back to systemic racism, what I think these definitions offer us is an opportunity to attack racist policies. So look at those policies, look at those systems or the policies that inform systemic racism, and attack the policy, not the people, because policies are easier to change anyway, in my opinion. It's very hard to change someone's mind.
Yeah. Do you have an example of a policy that might be informing or reinforcing a racist system, just so we can kind of wrap our heads around what that looks like in practice?
Sure. So redlining, for example, looking at mortgages and lending practices. So my work focuses on Chicago, and there's some really, really interesting and thorough studies of housing and mortgage lending in the history of Chicago. And so specifically, I'm talking about something called restrictive racial housing covenants. And these were agreements between realtors and homeowners that homeowners wouldn't sell their properties to people of color.
Wow.
And that effectively kept neighborhoods white. Or there are agreements between or among real estate agents that they wouldn't rent homes or show homes to people of color in certain neighborhoods. And so that's a racist policy that really, even to this current day, informs the way in which we think people move throughout the city of Chicago. Like, so African Americans only settled on the South Side, and white people inhabited the suburbs. Like that just occurred naturally. Well, that's not the case. There's a racist policy in play that created that dynamic, that informs segregation that we're still living with today.
First, I'm talking with the Chief of Police of the Richmond Police Department, Mike Britt. Chief Britt, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
You became chief just back in April, right in the middle of a pandemic and a lot of other things going on, but you've been a part of the force in the department for some time. Can you just tell us briefly about your history with the Richmond Police Department?
Well, I've been a full-time Richmond officer for going on 25 years. Prior to that, I was a dispatcher and a reserve officer, so I've got about a 35-year history with the department. In January of 2016, when Chief Branham was named as the new chief of police by Mayor Snow, he appointed me as a deputy chief, and I've been in the administrative offices since 2016.
Okay, great. We've been talking on this show about sort of the renewed national attention to problems of systemic racism, incidents of police violence, and I wanted to ask what kinds of things the Richmond Police Department has done or has thought about in response to that and in that context.
Well, it's been a very difficult time, and I want to start this topic off by saying that those of you who hate the police based on what you saw in recent news articles of officers in Minneapolis and other places in this world, as a profession, as a representative of this profession, I apologize for that, because I don't think what you or anybody else saw was true modern police work. What you saw are criminal acts. And it's very unfortunate that the acts of a few officers can cause so many problems to a nationwide organization. And that is what we've seen in the news is not what Richmond Police Department or I or most other agencies stand for. And it's very unfortunate.
Thank you for that. Are there any specific changes that you as a department have made in training procedures or reporting policies, rules of engagement? I know that it's a conversation, and we've heard about different departments looking at how they handle certain kinds of engagements as a result. Is that something that has come to the Richmond Police Department as well?
Yes, we've began the discussion. We have policies and procedures in place, and one of our long-term goals we haven't been able to really get completed is a complete update of our policies and procedures. So some of them are old, however, they do cover the key, such as use of force. The use of force continuum and the case law that exists regarding use of force. Just the policies need updated just a bit. So I've been spending a lot of time going over our existing policies and our training as well. We've currently Major Bales and I, my deputy chief, been in contact with a company that has offered us an opportunity to rewrite our policy manual and bring it up to today's standards, and as far as legally defensible policies, that type of thing. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. In general, I looked over our entire operation, and if you'll notice, and hopefully the public can too, the Richmond Police Department has not been involved in any unfortunate incidents, thank God. And that's just I have good people. The men and women of the Richmond Police Department are great officers, and there's inherent training now when a police officer comes on new into the profession. They've integrated bias-based policing training as well as de-escalation techniques and the mental emotional training.
Okay.
That's all part of the academy now, and it's also a part of our annual recertification training, which we are going through right now. Every officer on this department, in pretty much the state of Indiana, has mandatory training that they have to go through every year. And
Okay.
we contracted with a web-based company where the officers are working their way through several hours of video along with pre and post tests, and that covers most of those key areas. So I think we're doing a pretty good job keeping up on that, but we could always do better. And that's what I'm looking at. What more can I do?
Yeah.
And I apologize if we haven't done that so quickly. I think it's important to think this through. I don't like knee-jerk reactions, and we don't currently have any issues that have come to the forefront. So we're thinking forward on this, and we're going to take the right steps. But
Yeah.
Basically, we've been very fortunate. I've got a great group of officers that are young, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but since 2016, we counted the other day, we've hired 36 policemen.
Okay.
Which makes a very young department.
Yeah.
One of the issues that I had that coming in, of course, I'm an old guy, older generation. I think, millennials, yeah, that's going to be a problem, but it really is not. And what I'm learning along the way is that one of the first things that we saw when we started putting younger policemen on the street is the complaints against officers for rudeness and that type of thing is really fallen away. We don't get as many, complaints of that nature. And I'm finding that these newer officers are, I guess the newer generation, are a lot more tolerant of different social status, and I couldn't be prouder of them. They're a lot more accepting of other cultures. And I'm not casting a shadow on my generation, but when you look around at some of the major incidents in the country, you'll notice that a lot of these guys are older officers and maybe from a different generation of policing.
Yeah. I do want to ask at a recent demonstration here back in June, there were people sharing some stories of being treated, they felt, poorly in certain circumstances because they felt the color of their skin being treated poorly by local law enforcement. And it's hard to know if we weren't there, it's hard to understand exactly what happened. But I do wonder how you track, or if you track or investigate any claims of racial discrimination or bias in local policing. Like, is that a part of some of the systems that you talked about?
Yes, we as long as I can remember, we've always tracked complaints against officers.
Okay.
Additionally, one of the most important things that we do, I don't think it's mandatory in the state of Indiana yet, but we've been doing it for several years. But anytime an officer has to use force of any type with a citizen, such as displaying a weapon or going hands-on with somebody, in addition to the report that the officer writes, the standard criminal report, it's accompanied by a use of force report, which is a completely separate document that breaks down exactly what force was used and why. Okay. So those are compiled by a deputy chief, and we keep a close eye on that. And so far we've done pretty well by looking at those. As far as a complaint against an officer's behavior or whatever, we have a complaint system in place that's been there for years, and you can come to the Richmond Police Department, pick up a complaint form, and fill it out, and then it comes back to the administration, and where it is most likely going to be assigned to someone to investigate.
Welcome to this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director of Whitewater Community Television. Thanks for joining me. Let me start off by saying thank you first to Chris Hardy, who did 3 straight weeks of In Focus for me, had some really great conversations, and I really do appreciate Chris stepping in and doing that. Somehow he may have thought that 3 was all he was going to do, but we'll be bringing Chris back into the conversations that we have, not just on social injustice and race issues, but some other issues we'll ask him to tackle. And the social issues that he has been talking about, the race relations in the community, those are conversations we will continue to have here on In Focus. I'll talk to various guests that I have, not just about that, but that is a part of what we have to deal with as a community. So we'll continue to have those conversations on and off, not just for the next couple of months, but into next year and beyond. We are a better community when we understand each other, when we work toward making everybody feel welcome. A couple of things to remind you of, believe it or not, because our primary election was pushed back so far, it's time to start registering for the general election. So if you need to check your voter registration, if you want to register to vote, or if you want to sign up to vote by absentee or mail, you can do that very easily. Just go to indianavoters.com. And you can do all of that in that spot, so you never have to leave the comfort of your house. If you're like a lot of people, you don't have to put on real pants and stuff like that. Also, if you were thinking about being a school board member, that's one of those elections coming up this time. The school board does not happen every year, but 2 of the 3 years. So if you're thinking about being a school board member, the first day to file was yesterday, the 22nd, and you have until August 21st at noon, which is a Friday, to sign up your petition and consent. Hopefully we got a lot of people signed up for school board. It is a very, very important thing. We have had conversations about reopening schools and what they need to look like. If you want to be part of some of those discussions going forward, you need to put your name on a ballot. So definitely do that. My guest today, I've had a chance to actually sit next to her while we've talked to some school board members, but I've never had a chance to kind of have her as the person answering questions. Kathy Girton, Chancellor of Indiana University East, thank you very much for joining me. I really do appreciate the time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Eric.
You've been in academic life for a while. Talk to me a little bit about what it was like when May came and went. There wasn't a crowd of people. There wasn't the big commencement. You didn't get to say class of 2020 and hear, woo, which always happens. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was very hard, of course, for us, and especially hard for our students and their families. They've worked so hard, and our faculty and staff have been along the journey with our students as well. So it was very difficult. On the other hand, I think our folks on campus, our external affairs staff and so on, did a really great job of using Facebook as a way to help celebrate our students' accomplishments, and they pulled together some really wonderful stories, and we got a lot of people reading those and commenting on them. And so, we did get a lot of able to get the word out on a lot of the great accomplishments of our students. And so I think that was wonderful, and it's just so hard. I was reviewing some of those stories today, actually, and it just reminds you of why we do what we do, and what great things our students and now alumni have accomplished and will accomplish. So it was hard, but we did what we could to continue the celebrations.
The pandemic obviously is not a good thing in any way, but it has kind of forced education, higher education, and education in general, maybe to look at some different ways of doing things. Talk about what Indiana University East in particular maybe has learned and maybe has gotten better at because of this.
Sure. I think we were already, Indiana University East was already quite experienced in online education. And so it wasn't as much of a heavy lift for us as the pandemic started, right after spring break, there was no coming back, everything was going to be online. And I'm not minimizing the transition because it was very difficult, but for our campus, we have a lot of expertise. Our Center for Faculty Development jumped right in and helped those faculty who weren't already teaching online, and our faculty jumped right in and worked extremely hard and have continued to do so. So, the thing that's interesting, there's a kind of an old joke about academia. It's very hard to change, and we do have wonderful traditions, and that's one of the great things about academics. And commencement is one of those, as we just talked about. But when people just jumped right in, and the change was like that, instantaneous. I mean, it was just amazing how much change, and not only our faculty and our teaching, but also our staff, as you know, that we went from being a fully everybody on campus to pretty much most people, not everyone, but almost all people except for essential personnel working remotely from home. And that was also a big adjustment on a dime. So there's that. And I think what's interesting for us, we are not a residential campus, as you know, so we don't have housing. And our students are very, very busy, and they work, and they have families, many of them. And so they're involved in many things besides their schoolwork. So sometimes when we have events on campus, we have good participation, but sometimes it could be broader. And so some of the things that we've learned were kind of a good outcome. We had some events that we did as Facebook Live events, and it was great because either if it was live or just things being posted on Facebook, I'm not the world's Facebook expert, so I'm probably saying some of those things wrong, but anyway, we had a lot of interaction, and many people were able to comment. And so you think about some students who may have some relatives at a long distance that would have never been able to come for something like, for example, our honors ceremony, where we honor students who are winning various awards, such as, let's say the outstanding student in nursing or outstanding student in business, so on and so forth. They may have never been able to attend those, and now they were able to, and virtually, which is great. So I think going forward in the future, as we come back to being more face-to-face, as that evolves over this next time frame, whatever that time frame will be, we will try to incorporate more options also for doing more virtual things, because that involves a wider group. So I think that's a thing that we learned very well. And we've had really outstanding participation in so many things. It's been great.
Thanks for watching this look back on In Focus 2020 on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. Hopefully there'll be time for the scrolling of the names, the credits at the end of the show. There's some folks I really need to thank because they have done some great work for me personally as well as for you, the community, during this past year in some difficult times. Brandon Gentry, Caitlin Ballard, Wes Miller, Michelle Thompson, Steve Bonwig, and Ryan Harris. They have been out there all during this year, all during the pandemic, in a number of different places, trying to help bring some artistic work to the community, as well as obviously government meetings and information and shows. And so thank you all very much. Thanks for watching this week's In Focus. We'll see you again next week. As always, I wish you well.
This episode of In Focus has been made possible through the support of the Wayne County government.
Last year, I completed a marathon. When I had COVID this year, I couldn't even play the acoustic guitar. And that really concerned me, and that really made it hit home for me. If somebody like myself, who I would say was generally healthy, can get knocked down that far by COVID-19, the people who could have severe symptoms, I couldn't imagine how that could impact their body.